Groundhog's Day. Let's try this one more time. The last video, I hated the last video. It was way too long. So let's pick up a little speed on this front and let's look a little less dead. So Elizabeth Warren, when she ran into the campaign, she went with this notion that I'm not going to take big money. Great. I'm going to be grassroots funded. Great. Now, I didn't entirely buy this. I mean, my thing was, ultimately, you are doing this just to kind of ape Sanders. People understood that in the last race in 2016, Hillary Clinton taking big money, standing beside Sanders, looked bad. He looked like a paragon of virtue. She looked like something far, far less. And she was penalized for it, despite the fact that ultimately, with a lot of help, she ends up winning. So in this particular race, what do you have? You have multiple candidates saying, we're not going to take big money. We're going to swear off big money. Because ultimately, what they're swearing off, the PACs for the most part, don't hurt them as much from the standpoint of the amount of money that they're raising entirely themselves, if that makes sense. Warren's one of those people that does that. She had no issue taking big money prior. She had no issue taking it later, which is what Chris Hayes exposed. Up to this point, everybody thought Warren was just kind of taking big money not taking big money going forward. Chris Hayes asked her, well, Warren, if you're not taking big money now, and that's the way to go, what was wrong with you taking it before? Because he's hitting on something very basic. If you are saying that money has a certain entanglements, there's certain things that dig into you when you're taking big money from the various players. If that was true now, wasn't it also true then? And what was going on when you were wrapped into those entanglements that you were talking about for that big money? Warren's answer is this.
So look, I've never actually been in a deeply competitive primary. I get it. Republicans come to the table armed to the teeth. They've got all of their donors, their wealthy donors. They've got their super PACs. They've got their dark money. They got everything going for them. And I'm just going to be blunt. I do not believe in unilateral disarmament. We got to go into these fights, and we got to be willing to win these fights.
So this just applies to the primary. Like, were you to get the nomination, or anyone else to get the nomination, like, just raise all the money you can, however you can.
Yes, but here...
Yes. Raise all the money you can get your hands on. Yes. This is just for the primary. What you notice there is she never answered his question. He asked her, if this is the way to do it now, what was wrong with the way you were doing it back then? She doesn't answer his question. She said, I don't believe in unilaterally disarmament. And she goes into this notion of, I'm going to take all the money in the world in the general. Great. But I kind of still want to answer to the question, right? Because ultimately, Chris Hayes' question just moves itself forward. Okay, if you're not going to answer that one, well, how about this? If this is the way to do it now, and the financial entanglements besmirch your character, these guys are investors, they're not necessarily donations, then why is it not problematic with you taking that money in the general? Meaning, aren't those entanglements still there? Is your reputation not besmirched, or your morality not besmirched by the investors that have those things that they want when they give you money? And if you are impervious to their charms, if you are impervious to the entanglements that are associated with the cash that's being given, why don't you take the cash in the primary? What's wrong with taking the cash in the primary? What's your issue? If you're going to take it in the general, why does it matter? Why does it matter? You can build that grassroots movement and take that cash, and maybe even build that grassroots faster with taking that cash. What is the problem with taking the cash in the primary if you're going to take it in the general? Chris Hayes never asked that question. He never went to the next question. That was the most natural question in the world, seeing it was the first question he asked in the first place that was just blown off. That's changed, however. Today, Elizabeth Warren has come out with a new policy position. That new policy position is she will unilaterally disarm. She will, from this point on, only do grassroots going forward. Why am I distrustful of this? I will tell you why I'm distrustful of this, because the pledge that Elizabeth Warren made for grassroots was not honored entirely. There were at least two instances. One where somebody essentially bought, I think it was the records for her, But a second case having to do with the money that, dark money that she essentially was raising for the Senate campaign that she intentionally and purposely kept, dumped into her presidential campaign. The campaign that was supposed to be grassroots funded. Now, when Emma Vigeland came out angry and vengeful at people pointing out that, whoa, this is a little bit dodgy, she points to Sanders and said, well, Sanders did the same thing. Problem. Sanders' campaign was always grassroots funded, meaning the money that Sanders took from his Senate campaign was entirely grassroots funded. The money that Elizabeth Warren took was not. When she made her grassroots funded pledge, she intentionally kept dark money, feathered her nest with that dark money, and then screamed that she was a grassroots funded candidate. She was skirting the edges. What is the point of these pledges? Is the point of these pledges to skirt the edges? Or is the point to just be a particular way in the way you go about your politics? I don't have to ask Sanders and try to check around every corner to see if Sanders is breaking some kind of vow or pledge that he said he was doing with the big money. He believes it. He gets up in the morning, he believes it. He goes to bed at night, he believes it. He lives his life in a way that he believes it. He ran the Senate races if he believed it. And at no point was he doing this nonsense, dodgy stuff, this gimmick of trying to trick people into the primaries to let them out of the primaries so they get into the general and do something that those people didn't want them to do. He doesn't do that. She does. It makes me distrustful. That's my point. So this pledge that she is going with, let's talk about it. I don't particularly buy it, but let's talk about it nonetheless. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content and you find yourself coming back here often, please like, share, subscribe. Yes, I did this video once before, but that video took far too long. This video should have been far shorter. So let's pick up the pace on it and be somewhat succinct. Elizabeth Warren's campaign comes out and says, in sort of a Twitter storm, that she won't accept big money even after the primaries. And when I'm the Democratic nominee for president, I'm not going to change a thing in how I run my campaign. No PAC money, no federal lobbyist money, no special access or call time with wealthy donors or high dollar fundraisers to underwrite the campaign. Now, I don't particularly buy this. I'm not wrong for not buying this. And I know some Warren supporters may think I'm being unfair in this, but I don't think I'm being unfair at all. I have to believe that the candidate actually believes what the candidate is doing and what the candidate is saying. And if the candidate doesn't believe it, then they're going to find ways to skirt what they're saying. The candidate has shown a propensity for skirting it, as I just told you that you could look up. I mean, it was exposed, if I'm not mistaken, in the New York Times, this notion of taking money that was already money that she was raising in the Senate and dumping it into her election campaign for president. The campaign that she says was entirely grassroots funded. It was not entirely grassroots funded. That's kind of my point. She was skirting it intentionally. The media, for the most part, gave her a pass. Emma Vigeland, for the most part, gave her a pass. But the reality of it is she was taking money that was not grassroots funded in order to use in her campaign tens of millions of dollars. I think it was like $10 million. So now I'm presented with a candidate once again. And the candidate has changed their policy and says, I'm not going to take any money. I'm going to just be a grassroots candidate. Me and Bernie are just going to be grassroots funded. Well, you've already skirted it once. So now I'm supposed to believe that the candidate that was somewhat dishonest in the way that they were messaging and going about their fundraising is now going to follow this through in an honest way. I asked Emma Vigeland. Emma Vigeland is a resident Warren expert. I said, Emma, you need to ask Warren about this. And not just ask Warren about this, you need to ask her in a way that closes every door, every crevice, every loophole, every corner to which she would hide, in which case she would exploit some kind of loophole. Because I don't believe her. And making this declaration in the way that she made her declaration, I am sure that there's some lawyer talk in there that allows her a caveat or loophole. And I sent Emma Vigeland out to find out. Emma didn't respond to me. But it didn't take long. This. Less than a day. Elizabeth Warren campaign clarifies she'll raise big dollar money for the party if she becomes the nominee, though not for her campaign. Well, that seems like a loophole to me. That seems like a massive loophole to me. Is the campaign and Elizabeth Warren's campaign and the DNC going to work in coordination? If the campaign and the party is working in coordination, can they organize themselves in a way where she gets the bang for the buck without actually being the one that gets the buck? Is she going to have people working for her in her staff, bundlers perhaps, people smoozing on her behalf, Hillary Clinton perhaps going out, talking on her behalf to get cash and some other means that goes around this particular pledge, just like she went around the other pledge. I'm making the point that this is a loophole. If the party and Warren can work in coordination with one another, does it entirely matter if she's not raising it for her quote-unquote self, that it's being raised for the party as opposed to being raised for Warren's campaign? That's a loophole. And I put to you that loophole will be exploited. I asked Emma, I said, Emma, it wasn't even a day, and my point was absolutely correct. This is a loophole and is massive. There's no difference in her campaign or the party. They're the same since they work in coordination. Am I wrong? I've never been unfair to you. I'd love an answer. And that's true. I haven't been unfair to her, and I would love an answer. Crickets. Crickets. I don't buy it. She's giving you a reason to try to think her and Sanders are one-to-one. She is being penalized because people see this con for what it is. I mean, think about it for yourself. A person is in the general or in the primary. They say, we're not going to take money. They say, we will take it in the general. And they say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. And they give you some excuse of, we're trying to build a grassroots network. Missing the fact they had taken money from the Senate race, dumped it into the primary in order to give themselves a feather nest, while simultaneously saying and lying that it's entirely grassroots funded. I'm sorry, it was. That makes me distrustful right off the bat, because she's just skirted around something that she said she was going to do, which makes me have no reason to believe that she won't try to do the same thing with this. This pledge will most likely be skirted also, just like the last one was. The candidate says there's a problem with taking money because it has entanglements. I agree with that. Great. The candidate then says they're going to take money in the general. What? But they say, look, we're trying to build a grassroots network in the primary. That's why we're going to take money in the general, but not the primary. All right. And I make the point that you're being had. This is a con. She's giving you reasons to allow her to get to one so she can perpetuate it. But then being penalized for that, well, people calling that out saying, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. You're going to be taking money. And to some degree realizing that the truce between her and Sanders is probably coming to an end, seeing as the rhetoric from some of the people in the Sanders campaign has gotten more sharp and creating division between Warren and Sanders. This has nothing to do with Warren thinking, oh, I think I have enough money that I can raise by this. No, this is more to do with I need to cut Sanders off at the knees when this truce expires, which it looks like this truce is going to expire. You can look at the rhetoric, you can look at the language that some of the people in the Sanders camp have been using, making this very distinction. We're not taking money in the general or the primary. They've started using that constantly. Warren is doing this in order to block that off. She's not sincere. And because she's not sincere, she's going to find ways to skirt it. I can't know that as a flat fact, but I can only look at her previous history, recent history. Just saying. Just saying. Like, share, subscribe. The war in Iraq was not a war for oil corporations. The United States had the Food for Oil program, which was lost after the 2001 invasion. The Economist report in 2014, Israel received 70% of the oil from Iraq, Kurdish, before Kurds were expelled. Who rules America? I answered you. It's the difference between corporation. I think you're looking for somewhat of a weird answer. I think what you're looking for is Israel. But that answer doesn't really make sense. You have corporations, not to mention other countries that work in tandem with the various politicians in this country. They pull and jockey for control. You want an answer of Israel. The answer doesn't quite make sense. It's somewhat biased. Slightly racist. Just saying. Like, share, subscribe. Think so. And by the way, I don't think Warren is Hillary. I don't think that at all. I think Warren, if given the opportunity, would punch a banker in the throat. I think she would do it in a heartbeat, and I think she would try to get away with it. She hates bankers. I think she would absolutely try to regulate Wall Street. I don't doubt that part in regards to her repertoire. I doubt everything else. I doubt any serious change in regards to foreign policy. Her foreign policy is outright atrocious. I doubt any real change from the standpoint of healthcare. I don't believe she's pushing for Medicare for all. I don't believe in any of that stuff. And coming up with this part, I'm even doubtful of this because, again, she gamed the system once before. I don't think she earnestly believes it, which means I don't think she earnestly goes through with it. I think she's going to try to skirt it. And fact is, the moment that she gets out the primary, you're stuck with what you got. Somebody that doesn't quite believe it, that is not on board for Medicare for all, has a foreign policy that for the most part is just like any other Democrat. And yeah, may want to regulate Wall Street, but doesn't have the capacity in the sense of a technocrat to get any of this stuff accomplished. Not to mention, I don't even think she could beat Trump. I think she is the worst of both worlds. But hey, I could be wrong. Like, share, subscribe.